Alright, what's up everyone? Undead Youth back again with yet another guide. Today we're going to be talking about the Restoration Druid. I really want to pump these healer guides out for you guys, just to kind of get them out of the way. They're going to be the easiest classes to talk about, I feel. One, because I played them a lot, and two, because I already have guides out that are done about them. So, with that being said, if it does seem like I go a little bit quickly over this guide, it's pretty much just because not a lot has changed for Restoration Druids, and I don't feel like I need to explain the basics of how the class plays in a really detailed level, because I did that already in really like my first ever WoW video, and it has like over 5,000 views, which I also think is insane. So if you really do want to learn the intricacies of the class, just go check that video out. This is just going to be like an update, right? The other two classes, Mistweaver and Discipline, that I've done so far for 7.0, they have received some pretty major changes, so I felt the need to kind of go over those, but not so much for Druid, right? So let's go ahead and talk about why the fuck you would want to play a Restoration Druid in 7.0. And the answer is because you want to heal some fools. This class is fucking awesome, right? So even though it's not really my cup of tea for raiding anymore, the Druid is so fucking solid, right? Like, it has always been able to put out a tremendous amount of healing no matter what stands in its way. It's one of, if not the most versatile healer in the game. It's always going to be effective. Even when there are absorbs flying around from paladins and priests, Druids were always pretty much like the next pick outside of Shaman, maybe, for a healing spot in a raid, because they're so good. They have the ability to stagger cooldowns or combine them together. A lot of their abilities have different synergies that can be modified through talents to work well together. They have a really strong tank healing cooldown, or damage reduction cooldown, I should say. They have the ability to heal slowly over time or to speed up those heals. They're just really solid, and the class doesn't change that much, which is a testament to how good both the players and the developers think the class is. So it's a safe bet that if you really want to stick with the class, Restoration Druid is good because you're not really going to incur too many changes. In fact, the biggest change that really came to Resto is in its mastery, which we'll talk about now, and then we'll talk about everything else. So the biggest change you need to be aware of is that your mastery is no longer the old harmony. The old harmony was basically a buff that you had to keep up that increased your healing by your mastery percentage, right? Every single time that you used your direct heal, it would increase the duration of that buff. So you had to use Swift Mend, Regrowth, or Reju to keep up this buff that made your hot stronger, and it was just really fucking annoying because you're not the direct healing class, and it was annoying to have to use those abilities or have to save Swift Mend for use of keeping that hot up. Almost seemed like a waste at times. So they've done away with that mastery, and I do think that that's probably a good thing. And they've replaced it with Harmony, but Harmony does something different now, where it increases your healing for each of your restoration heals on a target, like your heal over times on a target. So if I have one rejuve ticking on a target, all of my healing, both direct and indirect, will be increased because I have that hot on the target. And the more hots I apply, the more that all of my healing will increase on that target. It starts with one of your hots and it builds from there. So you have the ability to massively stack up a bunch of healing on important targets or to spread around your mastery. And just with doing this, I think that they've increased the skill cap of the class and the thought process that's involved in playing the class. Whereas before, it was pretty much just, I guess that there was a little bit of skill cap in using a direct spell every few seconds to keep up a buff, whatever. But now your thought process is going to be very different. Your thought process when looking at a fight is always going to be, is it better for me to spend the globals and the mana that it would take to cast these rejuves or whatever, or what have you, on other targets to spread out my healing, or is it more beneficial in this moment to stack hots on a specific target, whether they be affected by a debuff, whether they be soaking something, whether they're the tank, or whether they're just expected to take a big amount of damage and burst coming up pretty soon, like something like Curse of the Legion or something like that, just anything, right? Then it might be better to stack that, and in general your mastery will be better if you stack things. So it always makes you think, what is the most beneficial way to use my heals, and also look at your talents and figure out which talents give you additional heal over time effects that could potentially be buffed through or help buff your master and targets. So that's just a little bit to think about, and we'll continue to refer to that as time goes on because it's important. But we're going to kind of get started here because there's not too terribly much to talk about. For the most part, all of your spells pretty much function the same. A couple of things have changed. Not too much, though. Life Bloom still functions like it used to. You place it on a target, it does a decent amount of healing. What's really good right now is if you have your tier 18 set bonus, you can still put 2 of them out. It's really, really good healing, but that's neither here nor there. And then it has a small chance when it ticks to actually give you an Omen of Clarity proc. And if you don't know what Omen of Clarity is, basically when this procs, you have your next regrowth will cost you no mana. So it's a free heal. And a free, pretty big heal at that. So awesome. You still have Rejuvenation, which just heals a target. It's your bread and butter heal. You're going to be spreading this around to everybody. You're going to be applying multiples if you take Germination and things like that. Then you have Regrowth, heals a target, kind of like your Flash heal, but also has a 60% chance to be a 60% increased chance to be a critical hit, and it will heal them for a little bit over time as well. So it's another potential hot that you can stack with your mastery. Then you have Swiftman, which no longer requires the target of Swiftman to have a heal over time effect on them, which I think is just a quality of life improvement. It was kind of annoying, right? It was kind of annoying. And especially because we might want to funnel our heal over times to other targets, we might just need to be able to top someone off really quickly with a Swiftman, right? And it's your best way of reacting to burst damage on a single target. Because as you might be able to tell, the spec does not really react very well to burst damage. It's all about setting up hots to gently bring people's health back up. So it's really nice that we have an instant cast, pretty big heal to kind of back us up in that regard. Then you have Healing Touch, which is just a single target heal flat. Like, it doesn't really benefit from anything. It will benefit from your mastery if the target has a bunch of heal over times on them, which can make us effective, tank healers. I mean, all these abilities coupled together, these 4 abilities right here, and then a few more that we'll talk about, do make you an effective tank healer if you want to be. And you'll notice that I say that in a lot of my videos about a lot of healers, and that's just because that's the world that we live in. Absorbs are no longer a prevalent thing, really. Clarity Will, for whatever god-awful reason, is still in the game, but it's not nearly as prevalent. And then, even though I dislike it, Paladins can still heal tanks passively, but still, every class being able to fulfill the role of tank healer and also be able to raid heal is important, not just because absorbs are gone, but also because someone like me, take someone like me for example, I have a much smaller raid group, and we don't have our choice of healers to pick from, right? So we're oftentimes stuck, especially in the old WoD environment, we're oftentimes stuck without necessarily a good, good tank healer, good raid healer, and a good, whatever niche healer. We didn't always have that optimal build. So being able to have all healers be more versatile if they so choose to is a great benefit, because now you don't have to have a Disc Priest or a Paladin in your raid to have a good tank healer. You can pretty much accomplish that with any healer, but you'll be sacrificing some of your AoE throughput, or at least leaning on other healers to do it. And I think that that's beneficial. Moving on, we have Wild Growth, just like we always had Wild Growth, right? Massive mana cost to it. Want to be using it only when it's necessary. Always be thinking, is it more beneficial for me to just spread around hots and heal people up gently over time, or do they need this Wild Growth right now to stabilize them? And that will be the deciding factor, because it costs a ton of mana, just like before. 10k mana versus Rejuice 3k mana, right? So just always be gauging Wild Growth in the idea of, is it better for me to be just spreading around my smaller heals, basically my rejuves, or is it better for me to use Wild Growth here? And bear in mind, Wild Growth also leaves a hot on the target, right? Which means that you can help use that to stack your mastery. Cool. Then you have Cenarian Ward. That's a talent, so we'll talk about it a little bit later. Finally, you have Efflorescence, which is no longer Wild Mushroom. It's just called Efflorescence, which is pretty cool. I believe, actually, the mushroom model changes every time, which is kind of funny. I don't know if that was always the case, but it's pretty interesting. I just saw that. I just noticed that. But yeah, super expensive spell, but super efficient spell at the same time. Like, it costs a ton of mana, but it heals a lot. Like, these are like rejuvenation rejuvenation ticks that are going on here. Let's look how much this heals for right here. You're looking at 4k mana every second, right? So let's look at how much our rejuve heals for. Yeah, I know I'm bad at math, but usually this is about a rejuve on whatever target is standing in it, and then you can buff it further with talents to heal for even more. So it's pretty darn impressive. You really want to be dropping this in the right spot, and even more so now because of the fact that you can actually take a talent that will put a hot effect on your efflorescence, which means again that if our idea is to stack hots on people, sometimes it's not just dependent, we don't just want to put our efflorescence down on the largest clump of players. Sometimes we want to put it down where we want to be able to stack our mastery better. So it's something else to think about. Cool. In terms of your cooldowns, not a lot has changed here. You have Iron Bark, which is the lowest tank healing cooldown in the game right now. Only 1.5 minute cooldown. I believe you can reduce that with talents. Fucking awesome. Not only does it reduce the damage they take, looks like it just reduces damage. It used to increase the healing done, but I guess that's no longer a thing. That's kind of a bummer. Oh well. And then you have Tranquility, which can actually reduce its cooldown as well. Crazy strong, right? And I do believe there's an artifact trait later on that will actually let you cast it while moving, which is just insane. And then you have Bark Skin, which is basically your own personal version of Iron Bark, which is always nice to have. So you can choose at any point in time to take a lot less damage as a Restoration Druid, which I think is really cool. Moving on, let's talk about our talents. 4 talents. The level 15 tier, you have the choice between Prosperity. Swiftman now has 2 charges, and its cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds. You have Cenarian Ward, which protects an ally for 30 seconds. Any damage taken will consume the ward and heal the target for X amount over 8 seconds, which is another hot. And then you have Abundance. For each rejuvenation you have active, the cast time of Healing Touch is reduced by 10%, and the critical effect chance of regrowth is increased by 10%, right? So what we have going on right now is basically it's going to come down to Prosperity or Cenarian Ward, and much like with the old version of the Restoration Druid, what you take is entirely dependent on other talent choices that you make later on in the tier. So basically, we'll just go ahead and say it out loud right now. If you take Soul of the Forest down here, which is pretty much like what it did in WoD, then Swiftwind and Prosperity are definitely going to be synergistic talents to take together. If not, Cenarian Ward is great just because it's a good talent and a really solid talent overall. It helps us stack mastery. It's another heal over time effect that we can use and spread out. It's good. And finally, Abundance. In all honesty, the added critical effect of regrowth is pretty nice, and you should really never be relying too much on Healing Touch to begin with. So honestly, the other 2 spells just beat it out. I mean, there's just no way an extra charge of Swiftman, especially when you're taking Soul of the Forest, is going to be worse than Abundance. It's not. Moving on to level 30, we have Renewal, which is just an instant 30% heal on yourself. And then you have Displacer Beast, which is Druid Blink, and then you have Wild Charge, which in our form basically just leaps you to reverse life grip, leaps you towards your target, right? So, fuck Wild Charge. Renewal, only if you need something like this. If you find that you're dying a lot, but you really shouldn't be, because Druids have so many ways to not take damage. Like, we'll just list off a few. You have Bark Skin, you have Iron Bark, which I guess you can also apply to yourself if you wanted to, right? You have Tree of Life Form. You have the ability to take Guardian Affinity, which we'll talk about in a second. So you have a ton of ways to reduce the amount of damage that you take, to the point where I could never see taking Renewal over Displacer Beast would be a better option. Displacer Beast is just a great way to avoid damage, right? Displacer Beast is Blink, and Blink is awesome. You can avoid so many mechanics. You can get around the room faster. It's epically good, and very, very difficult to pick any one of these other choices over it, flat out. Moving on to level 45, you have Balance Affinity. What your affinities are, if you don't know, this is another thing that's changed, right? So now you can borrow things from other specs. of Druid essentially, and you can also give yourself a passive buff that would be something that you would normally find on the other two specs, or other three specs, excuse me. So for Balance Affinity, you have it passively increases the range of all of your abilities by 5 yards, and it also gives you Moonkin form with Star Surge, Lunar Strike, and then you also will have, as you normally would have, Moonfire, Sunfire, and Wrath. So you can basically do damage as an Owlkin or a Moonkin. And then if you take Feral Affinity, you will get Feline Swiftness, so you'll passively move 15% faster. And then you will get Shred, Rake, Rip, Ferocious Bite, and Swipe. And your energy regeneration rate will be increased by 35% to basically make it playable as a cat if you wanted to. And then finally, for Guardian Affinity, you gain Thick Hide, which reduces the damage that you take by 10%, which is what we were talking about before, damage reduction again. And you get Mangle, Thrash, Iron Fur, and Frenzy Regeneration. So, you're pretty much going to be taking these for their passives. We'll just throw that out there. You're not going to be tanking, and you're not going to really be emergency tanking. You're still going to get trucked if you try to emergency tank something. I'm sorry. There's no way you're going to be able to build up rage fast enough to use Iron Fur and not die. But the added 10% is great, right? There are a lot of classes that would just kill for just to be able to reduce 10% of their damage in their talent tree. But the other two talents are also very good as well. Honestly, I think the one that we can definitely discount is going to be your Feral Affinity, just because you don't really need that movement speed increase. It's always good to have a movement speed increase, but when you have things like Displacer Beast and also just the ability to hop into cat form when you're not healing to get to and from places, it's not that great. And then, like I said, Guardian Affinity is okay, but then Balance Affinity is really good because you can heal people from farther away, great, just with your normal spells, but more importantly, fucking Tranquility can have an even bigger range. Holy shit. That's awesome. And I want to say that it also affects your fucking efflorescence, which is crazy if it does. But even just your Tranquility, with everything we've talked about with Tranquility, that's enough reason to take Balance Affinity right there. And also, it's even easier for you to pop in and out of Moonkin form to do DPS than it is for you to, you're not, like I said, you're not going to be a bear. You're just not going to do it. And even being a cat opens you up to so many more things that you don't want to have to fucking worry about. So, probably Balance Affinity. Level 60 doesn't fucking matter. Literally does not matter. Whatever. Level 75. Soul of the Forest, Incarnation, Cultivation. Basically, Incarnation turns you into a giant fucking badass tree again. Fuck yeah. Badass tree guy. Fuck yeah. It empowers your abilities, right? So your rejuvenation just heals for a lot fucking more. Your regrowth is instant cast. Your wild growth heals more targets. Fuck yeah. Wild tree guy. Cool. Okay. And then Soul of the Forest. Basically, when you take that, your Swiftman empowers your next spell cast, right? So it will increase the healing of your rejuve or regrowth, your next one, by 200%. Which, if you guys don't know how things work in World of Warcraft, if something increases the effectiveness of something by 100%, it doubles it. So if it increases it by 200%, it triples it, right? Triple the effectiveness of a rejuve is fucking stupid for the amount of mana that rejuve actually costs. Triple the amount of a regrowth that already has a 60% added critical strike chance is fucking stupid. And then finally, wild growth by 75%. This is obviously what is most important and what you're going to be using your Soul of the Forest buff on the most. It really allows you to cherry pick those moments, which you should already be doing. You should already be cherry picking your wild growths to only really use it when it's necessary. But man, when it's necessary, you are really going to get the most out of that 10k mana if you take Soul of the Forest. Yes, you can get a really strong wild growth out of Incarnation Tree of Life, but you can only do it every, how long? 3 minutes. So really it just comes down to the fight. Does the fight have reliable burst damage, right, that you can counter every 3 minutes or so, or you can just hold on to Incarnation and get the best out of it when you really need it? Or Soul of the Forest, do they not have that? It's just pretty constant damage, or doesn't really line up very well with the cooldown of Incarnation? Then Soul of the Forest. And otherwise, it's just going to be down to your playstyle. You can make decent use out of both. It just really comes down to you want that extra cooldown that you could potentially stack with other things, or do you want to spread it out? Or do you just want to have constant increase to your healing and enough nice little buff that increases the complexity of your class, which might make it more engaging. It's entirely up to you and the encounter. Cultivation, you fucking suck. Sorry. It's cool for mastery stacking, but like it holds not even close to a candle to the other two. So yeah. Moving on to level 90, we have Spring Blossoms, which adds a heal over time effect to your efflorescence, which is what we were talking about before. So just a passive buff to one of our strongest spells. And then Inner Peace fucking reduces the cooldown of Tranquility by 60 fucking seconds. What the fuck? It's crazy. And then Germination, you can apply Rejuve to the same target twice. I love Germination, and Germination was like the go-to last expansion, but the fact of the matter is it can't compete with these other two. Like, they put it in the wrong tier. It cannot compete with these guys for AoE fucking healing. It's crazy. Spring Blossoms is not just an AoE ability, though, like we said, because it adds another hot, just like Germination would if you apply it to your other targets with a bunch of hots on them to increase your mastery. So with that regard, I just think it just beats out Germination already. Yes, it's tied to an ability that has a higher mana cost, but I mean, it also does way more healing. So I can't see Germination ever beating out Spring Blossoms ever. And then Inner Peace, again, it just comes down to cooldown matching. Can you make the most use out of your Tranquility? Can you fit it in 2 windows and not have it overheal by a bunch? That's really what it comes down to. Level 100, you have Moment of Clarity, which your Omen of Clarity, which we talked about, was that 1 free regrowth. Basically, what we're going to have to do is you're going to have to look at, now you're going to have 3, right, instead of just 1. So really cool, but super fucking RNG, unfortunately. But it can lead to really exciting playstyle if you just want something different. The Druid can be very planned out outside of your Moment of Clarity procs. So if you want to kind of throw a wrench in things and make things exciting, take Moment of Clarity, but yeah. Then you have Stone Bark, which reduces the cooldown of Iron Bark by 30% and increases your healing from heal over time effects by 20%. So this is where the passive increase to your healing that used to be on Iron Bark comes from. They just threw it in the talent, which kind of sucks. And it can be useful if you just need that cooldown. If a tank's just dying to this one ability, like I could potentially see this being very useful in Mythic dungeons, more importantly, where you're pulling a lot of mobs every few seconds, or like generally mechanics come in a little bit faster because the fights don't last as long, stuff like that. But in general, nothing beats Flourish. Flourish, a 1-minute cooldown, which extends the duration of all of your heal over time effects on friendly targets within 60 yards by 6 seconds. And I actually want to see one thing, and we'll test this live. Okay, so it doesn't look like, let me just change it real quick. Yeah, okay, it doesn't look like Balance Affinity affects that. I might be wrong. But if Balance Affinity does, it's even better. They're even better together, right? But basically, extending the duration of all of your heal over time effects without having to recast them to waste the mana, to waste the cooldowns, or the globals. Like, guys, come on. What? Crazy. Like, I don't even have to fucking... What? I shouldn't have to tell you how good that is. You can use this with all of your abilities. It's a passive buff to your mastery. It's just good. Like, I hate to really just keep telling you guys, like, it's just good, but the Restoration Druid's not hard to figure out once you know how all the spells work together, and you keep your mastery in the back of your head all the time. This should be an obvious winner. At the end of the day, that's kind of what your talents are going to look like, and it really looks like they're probably going to be the same thing for both raiding and mythics, or 5-mans. I'll use the term 5-mans. You might switch Soul to Force for Incarnation for 5-mans, though. Just for more constant healing. But other than that, that's pretty much it. That's all I really have to say about the Restoration Druid. Not a ton. Oh, let's talk about fucking Innervate, because that's changed, right? Let's talk about that. You now have the ability on a 3-minute cooldown to infuse a healer with energy, and basically allowing them to cast a spell without spending mana for 10 seconds. It's a little bit different than what it used to be, but still fucking amazing. You know, this is going to be a huge dynamic for healers, I feel. There's 2 things that have really changed in Legion, which I'll touch on probably in like its own separate little mini video. The ability to cast without using mana. Symbol of Hope, Innervate, and Mana Tea. Mana Tea, actually, I think just reduces mana cost, but the point is, abilities like that are huge and obviously change how healers will work together. And also, the ability to let people die to get buffs out of the raids. So, like, letting Shadow Priest die after they do a ton of damage, with their, what the fuck do you call it? Surrender to Madness. Can also in turn give Ret Paladins a buff, um, which is stupid. And then you have Holy Priest, which can die, then have an extended Guardian form at the end, which is crazy. So I'll touch on that all later, but just know that that's a huge portion of how healers are going to be planning and really important progression fights. And I think it's interesting because those are two things that we haven't had to think about in a very long time. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Next video coming out is the Shaman. Thank you guys.